3 patrol cars, a crying husband, a detective who almost believed him. He said his wife vanished without a trace. Tears, panic, the perfect performance. His mistress waited outside. But when the detective opened her file, the room went quiet. He said, "Sir, are you absolutely sure you want to report this woman missing?" The fluorescent lights inside the Fulton County precinct buzzed low and steady, the kind of sound that blends into the background until silence makes you notice it. It was 6:47 in the morning, and most of the desks were still empty. A few officers moved slowly between filing cabinets and coffee machines, not yet fully awake, not yet ready for whatever the day would bring. But at the front desk, a man stood gripping the edge of the counter like it was the only thing keeping him upright. His name was Bomani Webb, 34 years old, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that used to make women pause mid-sentence. This morning, though, his eyes were bloodshot, his shirt was wrinkled at the collar, his jaw was tight, and his voice cracked just enough to sound convincing when he said the words, "I need to file a missing person report. My wife. She's been gone for 3 days." The officer at the desk barely looked up at first. Missing persons came through here more often than people realized. But something about Bomani's delivery, the way he paused between words, the way his hand trembled but his eyes stayed dry, made the officer glance at him a second time before handing over the form. Bomani filled it out with careful handwriting. Nima Avery Webb, age 31, 5'6", medium build, last seen wearing a gray cardigan and brown flats. No known enemies, no history of mental illness, no note left behind. He wrote it all like a man who had rehearsed, because he had. Outside in the parking lot, sitting in the passenger seat of Nima's own car, a modest Honda Accord that still smelled like her lotion, was a woman named Denise Harlan, 28, sharp cheekbones, fresh nails, and a phone in her hand. She was texting Bomani instructions in real time. "Don't forget to mention the grocery store. Say she went out for milk and never came back. Keep your voice low. Cops trust quiet men." Bomani's phone buzzed in his pocket every 40 seconds, and every 40 seconds he shifted his weight to keep the officer from noticing. The case was assigned to Detective Clement Briggs, 52 years old, with 31 years on the force and the kind of eyes that had stopped believing in coincidences around year 12. Briggs had a rule he never spoke out loud but followed like scripture. Listen to a man's story twice, and the second time, watch his hands instead of his face. He sat across from Bomani in a small interview room and let him talk. Bomani gave the performance of his life. He spoke about Nima like a man who had lost the love of his existence. He described their morning routine, coffee together, a kiss before work, how she always left a sticky note on the mirror that said, "Have a good day, baby." He nearly choked on that last detail, but Briggs noticed something. Bomani's phone kept buzzing, and every time it did, his eyes flicked toward the door, not with worry, but with impatience. Briggs typed Nima's full name into the system, Nima Avery Webb. The screen loaded, and what appeared on that monitor changed the expression on Briggs's face in a way that 20 years of homicide cases had not. He leaned back slowly. He read it again. He closed the folder. He looked at Bomani for a long, uncomfortable moment and said in a voice that was more warning than question, "Sir, are you absolutely sure you want to report this woman missing?" Bomani blinked. He didn't understand. He nodded and said, "Yes, she's my wife. I just want her found." Briggs said nothing else. He let Bomani leave. But the moment the door closed, he picked up his phone and made a single call. His voice was low and steady. "Someone just reported a Nima Avery Webb missing. Yes, that Nima." What Bomani didn't know, what he had never bothered to know, was that the quiet woman he had replaced, erased, and discarded was not who he thought she was, and the wheels that were now turning would not stop until every lie he had built, His new life came crumbling to the ground. Because while Bomani was at the precinct playing the part of a grieving husband, Denise Harlan was already back at the house, Nima's house, rearranging the living room furniture. Nima's clothes had been boxed up and shoved into the garage. Her name had been peeled off the mailbox. Her favorite mug, the one with the chipped handle she refused to throw away, had been dropped in the trash can by Bomani's mother, Vera Webb, who had smiled while doing it and said to Denise, "Go ahead and settle in, sweetheart. That girl was dead weight anyway." Vera was 59 years old with a voice like church bells and a heart like a closed fist. She had never approved of Nima. Not her quiet voice, not her simple clothes, not her family name that came with no money, no status, and no leverage. Vera had spent years planting seeds of doubt in her son's ear. "She's holding you back, baby. A man like you deserves a woman who matches his ambition. I'm not saying leave her, I'm just saying look around." And Bomani, who had always been more his mother's son than his own man, eventually looked around. He looked right at Denise. Denise had worked at the same shipping company as Nima. They sat 3 desks apart. Nima had called her a friend. Denise had called Nima a stepping stone. She studied Bomani from a distance for months before making her move. A laugh too long, a hand on his arm at the company barbecue, a text that said, "Just checking on you at 11 at night." And Bomani, who had already been softened by his mother's poison, fell into it like a man walking off a cliff and calling it flying. What made Denise dangerous was not her beauty or her boldness, it was her patience. She didn't rush. She didn't make herself obvious. She moved the way water moves through a crack in a foundation, slowly, invisibly, until one day the whole wall comes down and everyone wonders how it happened. She memorized Bomani's complaints. She mirrored his frustrations. When he said Nima didn't understand his ambition, Denise nodded and said, "You deserve someone who sees your vision." When he said he felt stuck, Denise leaned in and whispered, "You were made for more than this." She became the echo of everything he wanted to hear, and Bomani, who had never been strong enough to question a voice that flattered him, mistook that echo for love. The triple betrayal was complete before Nima ever knew it had begun. Her husband, his mother, and the woman she had trusted enough to share lunch with every Thursday. To understand Nima, you had to go back, not just to her childhood, but to the soil she came from, a small town outside of Savannah, Georgia, where the air tasted like salt and pine, and the houses leaned into the wind like old men telling stories. That was where Nima Avery grew up, in a 3-bedroom house with a screened porch, a garden out back, and a grandmother who believed that silence was not weakness, but wisdom. Her grandmother's name was Opal Avery, a woman built from patience and prayer. She raised Nima alone after both of Nima's parents passed in a car accident when Nima was only 4. Opal never remarried. She never complained. She worked nights cleaning office buildings downtown, came home smelling like lemon disinfectant and floor wax, kissed Nima's forehead, and made breakfast before the sun came up. That was her rhythm, and she never broke it. But Opal had a secret that she carried like a stone in her chest for decades. Her late husband, Nima's grandfather, had built a logistics and real estate holding company in the early 70s. He started with 2 trucks and a handshake deal with a local warehouse. People in town knew him as a hard-working man who drove his own routes and loaded his own freight. They didn't know about the contracts he signed in quiet offices, the properties he purchased under a trust name no one recognized, or the partnerships he built with men who understood that real wealth didn't need a billboard. By the time he passed in 1989, the company had grown into a quietly massive operation, spanning freight routes, commercial properties, and long-term investment portfolios. But he never went public. He never put his name on a building. He structured everything through a private family trust, the Avery Family Trust, and made Opal the sole trustee. Opal could have lived in a mansion. She chose the screened porch. She could have hired a driver. She kept taking the bus. She believed that money without character was just noise, and she wasn't about to let noise raise her granddaughter. On Nima's 16th birthday, Opal gave her a gift. It was a thin gold bracelet with a small key charm dangling from the clasp. Nima held it up to the light, turning it slowly, admiring the way it caught the sun. She asked what the key opened. Opal smiled the way old women smile when they know something the world hasn't figured out yet, and said, "It doesn't open a door, baby. It opens a truth, and you'll know when it's time." Nima wore that bracelet every single day from that moment on, through high school, through college at Spelman, where she studied business administration and met a charming, ambitious young man named Bomani Webb at a homecoming mixer, through their wedding, which was small and sweet and held in Opal's backyard, through the early years of marriage when things were still soft and Bomani still looked at her like she was the only woman in a room full of them. She wore it when Opal passed quietly in her sleep 3 years into the marriage. She wore it when she sat on the floor of the hospital hallway and cried so hard her body shook. She wore it when a law firm called 2 weeks later and said they needed to speak with her urgently regarding the Avery family trust. She didn't return the call. She thought it was a scam. She was grieving too deeply to think about paperwork, and so the trust sat untouched, growing, compounding, silently becoming one of the largest private holdings in the southeastern United States. Nima had no idea. She went back to work at a small shipping company, a company that, unknown to her, was a subsidiary of the very trust that bore her family name. She lived small because that was all she knew. She loved simply because that was how Opal had taught her. She cooked meals from Opal's handwritten recipe cards. She hummed the hymns Opal used to sing while hanging laundry on the line. She kept a small garden on the apartment balcony because the smell of fresh basil reminded her of home. And when Bomani came through the door at the end of a long day, she greeted him the same way Opal had greeted the morning, with warmth, with softness, with the quiet belief that love was something you gave without keeping score. In the early years, Bomani received that love like a man who knew he was lucky. He brought her wildflowers from the gas station on Tuesdays, not because it was a special day, but because he wanted to. He rubbed her feet on the couch while they watched old movies. He told her once, in the dark of their bedroom, that she was the safest place he had ever known. And Nima believed him. She held those words like a lantern in every dark moment that came afterward, not realizing that the man who said them was already becoming someone else. She believed that if she was kind enough, patient enough, faithful enough, the people around her would treat her the same way. She was wrong. The unraveling didn't happen all at once. It happened the way rot works, slowly, quietly, from the inside out, until the thing that was supposed to hold you up collapses under your feet and you realize it had been hollow for longer than you knew. Denise was patient. She had to be. She knew Bomani wouldn't leave Nima overnight. Men like him needed to believe they were the ones making the decision. So she planted seeds, small ones at first, then larger, then ones with roots deep enough to crack concrete. It started at work. Denise would sit beside Nima at lunch and ask innocent questions. "Girl, is everything okay at home? Bomani seemed stressed when I saw him at the store." Nima would tilt her head and say everything was fine. And Denise would nod slowly, like she knew something Nima didn't, and change the subject. That pause, that knowing nod, was the weapon. It made Nima feel like she was the last person to understand her own marriage. Then Denise went to work on Bomani directly, late-night texts disguised as concern. "Hey, just wanted to check on you. Nima mentioned you've been working a lot." Bomani didn't respond the first time, or the second, but by the fourth, he typed back a smiley face. By the 10th, he was calling her on his lunch break. By the 20th, he was meeting her at a hotel on the other side of town. and telling himself it didn't mean anything. Vera accelerated everything. She visited the house more frequently, every Sunday, then every Wednesday, then whenever she felt like it. She never came empty-handed. She always brought something for Bomani and nothing for Nima. She'd walk past Nima without greeting her, set a bag of Bomani's favorite pastries on the counter and say, "I brought these for my baby. Not for you two. Not for the house. For my baby." Every word was a line drawn in the sand, and Nima was always on the wrong side of it. She'd sit at the kitchen table and talk about women she knew whose husbands had upgraded, and how it was natural for a man to outgrow a wife who couldn't keep up. She said these things while Nima was in the room, folding laundry or washing dishes as if she were furniture. Nima noticed everything. She just didn't say anything. That was her way. She noticed the hotel receipt in Bomani's jacket pocket. She noticed the perfume on his collar that wasn't hers. She found a pair of earrings under the bed, gold hoops with a small diamond stud, and she knew they belonged to Denise because she had complimented them once at work. She placed them on the kitchen counter and waited. Bomani came home, saw them, picked them up, and said, "Oh, these must be yours." He didn't even flinch. And Nima realized something that broke her more than the betrayal itself. He didn't think she was smart enough to know. The breaking point came on a Sunday evening. Bomani had invited Vera and Denise over for dinner. He didn't ask Nima, he told her. She spent 3 hours in the kitchen making oxtail stew, rice, collard greens, and cornbread from scratch. She set the table with care. Cloth napkins, the good plates, a small vase of flowers in the center. She wanted to believe that maybe if she tried hard enough, the warmth would come back. Maybe if the food was good enough, the laughter would return. They sat down. Nima served. Vera took one look at the plate, pushed it forward slightly, and said without looking up, "Denise, honey, next time you should cook. At least then Bomani will have something worth coming home to." The table went quiet for exactly 1 second. Then Bomani laughed, not a nervous laugh. A real one, like his mother had said something clever. Denise smiled and looked down at her plate, playing humble. And Nima stood there holding the serving dish, frozen, feeling the heat of the ceramic against her palms and the cold of every single person at that table who was supposed to love her. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She placed the dish on the table, excused herself, and walked to the bathroom. She locked the door, sat on the edge of the bathtub, and stared at the wall until the voices in the dining room turned into background noise. Something inside her didn't break. It went quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm has already torn through and there's nothing left to destroy. That night, after everyone had left and Bomani had fallen asleep on the couch, with his phone on his chest, a text from Denise glowing on the screen that said, "Tonight was perfect," Nima did something she had never done before. She removed the gold bracelet from her wrist. She held it in her palm, feeling the weight of the tiny key charm, and placed it gently on the nightstand. She stood in front of the bathroom mirror for a long time. She barely recognized the woman looking back at her. There were shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there a year ago. Her cheeks were thinner. Her shoulders curved inward like she had been carrying something invisible for so long that her body had reshaped itself around the weight. She touched her own face the way you touch something fragile, and for the first time she felt sorry, not for what had been done to her, but for how long she had let it continue. She walked through the house one final time. She passed the dining table where Vera's words still hung in the air like smoke. She passed the kitchen where she had spent 3 hours cooking a meal that no one at that table had deserved. She passed the living room where Bomani slept with Denise's name on his phone and not a single thought of his wife in his mind. She looked at all of it, the house she had cleaned, the life she had tended, the love she had poured into every corner. and she understood, with a clarity that was almost peaceful, that none of it had ever been returned. Then she packed one bag, just the essentials. She didn't take jewelry. She didn't take photographs. She took a change of clothes, her wallet, her phone, and the bracelet. She picked it back up at the last second, unable to leave the only piece of opal she had left. She walked out the front door at 4:17 in the morning. The street was dark and empty. She got in her car, started the engine, and drove with no destination. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew that for the first time in years, the silence around her felt chosen. Somewhere between Georgia and South Carolina, her phone rang. She didn't answer. It rang again. A voicemail came through from a number she didn't recognize. She almost deleted it, but something, maybe instinct, maybe Opal's hand reaching through memory, made her press play. The voice on the message was calm and professional. "Ms. Avery, this is regarding the Avery Family Trust. This matter is now urgent. The trust requires your signature. The current valuation has reached a level that demands immediate legal attention. Please contact us at your earliest convenience." Nima pulled over at a gas station. She sat in the parked car with the engine idling, staring at the phone. She played the voicemail again, then a third time. She didn't understand what it meant, but she saved it, and for the first time in months, something flickered behind her eyes that wasn't sadness. It was curiosity. 3 weeks passed, and in those 3 weeks, 2 very different lives were being built from the wreckage of the same marriage. On one side, Bomani filed the missing person report. He played the worried husband on social media. He posted a photo of Nima, one from 2 years ago where she was smiling, soft, unguarded, and wrote beneath it, "Please, if anyone has seen my wife, contact me. I just want her home." The post got 400 shares. People in the comments called him a good man. Denise liked the post from her own account, adding a prayer emoji. Behind closed doors, Bomani and Denise had fully taken over the house. Denise redecorated the bedroom. She replaced the curtains Nima had chosen, threw away the throw pillows Nima had found at a market in Savannah, and hung a new mirror where Nima's grandmother's photograph used to be. Vera helped. She came over with storage bins and labeled them old stuff in black marker. She packed away every trace of Nima like she was archiving a closed chapter. On the other side, Nima was sitting in a law office in Charleston, South Carolina, across from a man named Theodore Gaines, senior partner at Gaines and Whitmore, the firm that had managed the Avery Family Trust for 34 years. He was 70 years old, calm, precise, and he spoke to Nima the way a man speaks when he's been waiting a very long time to deliver news that will change someone's life. He opened a leather folder. Inside were documents, pages and pages of them, detailing the holdings, investments, and assets of the trust. Freight companies, warehouses, commercial real estate in 12 states, investment portfolios that had compounded for over 3 decades. And at the bottom of the final page, a number, $38 billion. Nima stared at the number. She didn't gasp. She didn't smile. Her eyes filled with tears, and they were not tears of joy. They were tears of grief. Because sitting in that leather chair, holding documents her grandmother had built brick by brick in silence, Nima realized that Opal had spent her entire life protecting this for her. And she had almost never known. She had almost walked through life believing she was nothing because the people closest to her had told her so. She thought about every night Opal came home from cleaning offices with sore knees and lemon-scented hands. She thought about the bus rides, the coupon clipping, the second-hand dresses Opal wore without complaint. All of it, every small sacrifice, every quiet choice had been made so that Nima would have something no one could take away. And the cruelest part was that the people who should have protected Nima had nearly succeeded in making sure she never found it. If she had stayed in that house one more month, one more week, she might have deleted that voicemail and kept living a life that was a fraction of the one her grandmother had built for her. Theodore let her sit with it. He didn't rush. When she was ready, he explained everything: the structure, the protections, the legal mechanisms Opal had put in place. And then he said something that made Nima sit up straight. "Ms. Avery, the house your husband currently lives in, the one in Atlanta, is owned by a subsidiary of this trust. It has been in your family's portfolio since before your marriage." Nima blinked. "What?" "The shipping company you worked at, Avery Logistics Southeast, is also a subsidiary. Your grandmother placed it in the trust in 2003. Nima let out a breath she didn't know she had been holding. Everything she thought was small about her life was connected to something enormous. The house she had been humiliated in was hers. The company where Denise had manipulated her was hers. The ground Bomani stood on, the roof over his head, the driveway where he parked, all of it was hers, and none of them had ever known. Meanwhile, Detective Briggs had been quietly investigating. He wasn't looking for a missing woman anymore. He was building a picture. He had already discovered the Avery Trust connection. He had pulled records on the house. He had confirmed that Bomani had changed the locks, removed Nima's name from the utilities, and allowed another woman to move in, all within days of Nima leaving. Briggs didn't like Bomani, not because of instinct, because of evidence. The moment came 3 weeks and 4 days after the missing person report. Bomani riding high on the belief that Nima was gone for good and his new life was fully in motion, organized a dinner at an upscale restaurant in Buckhead, a celebration of what he called a fresh start. He reserved a private dining area. He invited his closest friends, his mother and, of course, Denise, who arrived wearing a fitted red dress and a necklace that once belonged to Nima, a thin chain with a pearl pendant that Opal had given her on her wedding day. The champagne flowed. The toasts were loud. Vera stood and raised her glass and said, "To my son, who finally found a woman who deserves him." Denise blushed on cue. Bomani kissed her cheek. His friends clapped. And then Detective Briggs walked in. He came through the front entrance with 2 uniformed officers behind him. He wasn't in a rush. His coat was buttoned. His badge was visible. The hostess tried to stop him, but he flashed his credentials and kept walking until he reached the private dining area. The room went still. Forks were set down mid-bite. Conversations died mid-sentence. Bomani looked up with champagne still in his hand, and his face shifted through 4 expressions in 2 seconds. Confusion, recognition, annoyance, and then fear. Briggs pulled a chair from a nearby table, sat down uninvited, and placed a manila folder on the white tablecloth. He looked at Bomani with the same measured calm he had used in the precinct 3 weeks ago. The room was so quiet you could hear the ice shifting in the water glasses. One of Bomani's friends slowly lowered his fork. Another leaned back in his chair like he was trying to create distance from whatever was about to happen. "Mr. Webb," he said, "we've concluded our investigation into the missing person report you filed." Bomani forced a smile. "That's great. Did you find her? Is she okay?" Briggs didn't return the smile. He opened the folder slowly. "We did find her, and we also found a few other things." He turned the folder so Bomani could see the first page. "Your wife, Nima Avery Webb, is the sole beneficiary of the Avery Family Trust, a private holding trust currently valued at approximately $38 billion. The word billion hit the table like a gavel. Nobody moved. Denise's smile collapsed. Vera's champagne glass tilted slightly in her hand. Bomani's jaw opened, but no sound came out. Briggs continued, his voice never rising. "She's not missing, Mr. Webb. She left, voluntarily, and based on what our investigation has uncovered, you have been residing in a property owned by her family's trust. The vehicle you reported as yours is registered under the same trust. And your companion here," he glanced at Denise without warmth, "appears to be wearing jewelry that belongs to Ms. Avery Webb. Denise's hand went to the necklace instinctively, as if it had suddenly become hot against her skin. Vera set her glass down slowly, her face draining of color. Then the restaurant's front door opened again, and Nima walked in. She wasn't dramatic, she wasn't loud. She wore a simple black dress, flat shoes, and the gold bracelet her grandmother had given her. Her hair was pulled back. Her face was calm. She didn't scan the room for reactions. She didn't look for sympathy. She walked to the edge of the private dining area and stood there the way a woman stands when she has already done her crying and there is nothing left to prove. Every person at that table saw her at the same time, and every person at that table had a different reaction. But the one thing they all shared was the sudden, sinking understanding that they had underestimated her in a way they could never undo. Bomani stood up. His chair scraped the floor. "Nima, where have you been? I've been looking for you. I filed a report. Nima raised one hand, gently, and he stopped. She looked at him, not with anger, not with hatred, with the kind of clarity that comes when someone has finally seen the full picture and no longer needs anyone to explain it. She said one line, quiet, measured, final. "I didn't come back for you. I came back for what's mine." Her attorneys, two of them, both from Gaines and Whitmore, stepped forward and served papers on the spot. Eviction notices for the property, asset recovery filings for the vehicle, a formal divorce petition. Every single thing Bomani had assumed was his. Every wall he had leaned against, every floor he had walked across with confidence. All of it had been hers the entire time. Denise looked at Bomani. Bomani looked at his mother. Vera looked at the table. And Nima turned and walked out of the restaurant without looking back, the gold bracelet catching the light as she passed through the door. The fall was not sudden. It was slow and methodical, the way gravity works on something that was never built to stand on its own. Bomani received the eviction notice 3 days after the restaurant. He had 30 days to vacate the property. He called Nima's phone 14 times that first week. She never answered. He left voicemails that started with anger and ended with begging. "Nima, please, we can talk about this. You can't just do this. That's our home." But it was never his home. It had never been his home, and the law didn't care about what he believed. He moved into a one-bedroom apartment on the south side of Atlanta. No balcony, no garage, no yard. The furniture didn't fit, so he left half of it on the curb. His friends, the same ones who had toasted him 2 weeks earlier, stopped returning his calls. Word had spread. Not because Nima told anyone, she never did, but because people talk. And in Atlanta, a story about a man who threw away a billionaire wife to live with her coworker was the kind of story that traveled fast and never stopped. Bomani sat in that apartment at night and stared at the ceiling. The silence was different here. In Nima's house, silence had always been soft, the kind that came with warmth, with the faint hum of a refrigerator and the distant sound of her moving through rooms, keeping things in order. Here the silence was hollow. It pressed against his chest. He kept reaching for his phone, not to call anyone in particular, but because his hands didn't know what to do when they weren't holding something that connected him to a life that no longer existed. He thought about the bracelet. He had seen it on Nima's wrist every day for years and never once asked what it meant. He thought about the Sunday dinners. He thought about the way she used to touch his face when he came home tired, how she never asked for anything, how she had stood in that kitchen holding a serving dish while his mother humiliated her and he had laughed. He remembered laughing, and the memory of that laugh burned through him like acid. His job at a mid-level consulting firm became uncomfortable. His co-workers looked at him differently, not with pity, with something closer to fascination, the way people stare at a man who walked past a winning lottery ticket and lit it on fire. His performance slipped. His manager noticed. Within 3 months, he was placed on a performance improvement plan. Within 6, he was gone. Denise lasted exactly 48 hours after the restaurant. She went home that night and sat in silence for a long time. Then she began to calculate. Bomani with Nima's house, Nima's car, and a stable life. That was a portfolio worth investing in. Bomani, without any of that, was just a man in a wrinkled shirt with no direction. She packed her things the next morning while he was in the shower. She left a note on the kitchen counter that said, "I think we need space." By noon, her number was blocked. She tried to return to work at the shipping company the following Monday. She walked in with her badge, her coffee, and her usual confidence. But when she sat down at her desk, an email was already waiting. It was from the corporate parent company, Avery Logistics Southeast. The email informed her that her position had been eliminated, effective immediately due to a corporate restructuring. A severance check would be mailed. Her access badge was deactivated by 10:15 that morning. Denise stood in the parking lot holding a cardboard box of her desk items and realized for the first time that the woman she had dismissed as nobody had been her employer the entire time. Vera's reckoning was the quietest and the deepest. She didn't lose a house. She didn't lose a job. She lost her son. Bomani, stripped of everything and drowning in regret, began replaying every moment, every decision, every whisper his mother had planted in his ear. He called her one evening not to talk, but to say one thing. "You told me she was nothing, Mama. You told me to let her go. Do you see what you did?" Vera tried to respond. She tried to say that she was only looking out for him, that she only wanted what was best. But Bomani hung up before she finished. He didn't call again for a long time, and Vera sat in her house, in the chair by the window where she always sat, and for the first time in her life, the silence around her felt like punishment. She replayed every Sunday dinner, every remark she had made while Nima stood holding a serving dish. Every time she had smiled at Denise and ignored the woman who had been nothing but gentle to her. She remembered the way Nima used to bring her flowers on Mother's Day, not because Vera had earned it, but because Nima believed that kindness was its own reason, and Vera had taken that kindness and crushed it like something disposable. The worst part was the quiet. Vera had always filled her life with noise, opinions, instructions, judgments delivered like verdicts. Now there was no one to instruct, no one to judge. Bomani didn't call. Her friends from church asked questions she couldn't answer. She sat in that chair by the window every evening and watched the street darken, and she understood something that she would never say out loud, but that her body already knew. She had not lost a daughter-in-law. She had destroyed the only person in her son's life who had ever genuinely loved him, and she had done it with a smile on her face. Detective Briggs closed the case quietly. There was no crime to prosecute, just a man who had reported his own irrelevance to the police without knowing it. But before he filed the paperwork, he reached out to Nima one last time. They met at a coffee shop near the law firm in Charleston. He didn't say much. He handed her a copy of the closed case file and said, "Your grandmother built something that outlasted every person who tried to tear it down. She'd be proud of you." Nima held the gold bracelet between her fingers, turning the small key charm slowly, and nodded. 6 months later, the world around Nima looked different, not because she had changed it, but because she had finally stepped into the space that had always been waiting for her. She didn't buy a mansion. She didn't buy a fleet of cars. She moved into a quiet brownstone on a tree-lined street in a neighborhood where people still waved at each other in the morning. The porch had a swing. The backyard had a garden. It reminded her of Opal's house in Savannah. The screened porch, the smell of earth, the feeling that home was not about size, but about peace. She established the Opal Avery Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to supporting women rebuilding their lives after domestic betrayal. It funded housing, legal aid, therapy, and vocational training. The first woman the foundation helped was a 36-year-old mother of two who had left her husband with nothing but a garbage bag of clothes and a bus ticket. Nima sat across from her in the intake office, listened to her story, and said, "You're not starting over. You're starting from truth. That's not the same thing." The woman cried. Nima held her hand, and the foundation grew from there, not through press releases or celebrity endorsements, but through word of mouth. One woman telling another that there was a place where someone would believe you and help you stand back up. Nima still wore the gold bracelet every day. She never took it off. It had become more than jewelry. It was a compass, a reminder, a conversation with a woman who was no longer there, but whose voice still echoed in every decision Nima made. Sometimes in the late afternoon, she would sit at her desk and look at the bracelet and remember the way Opal's hands looked when she fastened it on her wrist that birthday morning, wrinkled and strong, smelling like cocoa butter and kitchen spice. She remembered how Opal had cupped her face and said, "The world is going to try to tell you what you're worth, baby. Don't you ever let it." Nima hadn't understood those words at 16. She understood them now. She understood them the way you understand a bridge after you've already crossed the river. You look back and realize it was the only thing that kept you from drowning. She didn't carry bitterness. That surprised people. Friends from her old life expected anger, expected lawsuits beyond the necessary ones, expected public statements or social media posts dragging Bomani's name through the mud. Nima did none of it. She understood something that most people learn too late, that revenge is a room with no windows, and she had already spent too many years in rooms like that. She chose air instead. She chose morning light and garden soil, and the sound of children laughing at the foundation's community center on Saturday mornings. One morning she sat on the porch of the brownstone with a cup of coffee in her hands. The sun was just starting to come through the trees, casting long shadows across the wooden steps. A bird landed on the railing, looked at her, and flew away. She smiled. She touched the bracelet. She turned the small key charm between her fingers, and she whispered so quietly that only the morning air could hear it. "I found it, Grandma. The truth, just like you said I would. Some people will remove you from your own life and call it moving on. They will pack your belongings into boxes labeled old stuff. They will replace your curtains, erase your name, and toast to your absence like it was a victory. But God has a way of turning the ones they discarded into the ones they can never reach again." The quietest woman in the room was always the most powerful. They just never bothered to look. If this story moved something inside you, if you felt Nima's silence and understood her strength, then do me a favor. Subscribe to this channel, hit that bell, and share this with someone who needs to hear that walking away is not weakness. It's the beginning. More stories like this are coming. Stay blessed.